Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome back to my RPG Storytime discussing The Rise of the Bloodlord, a old 3.5 edition campaign that I ran years ago, now a decade ago, I believe, over a decade ago. And we are into the closing days of it. Now, up until this point, I've had fairly complete, if not absolutely complete, notes and logs with which to refer to. This was all run over IRC. It was an internet chat-based game. So I had a number of logs and other electronic records to look to. Due to hard drive failures over the years, I've lost a number of those. So I'm going to cover the last bits of the campaign from memory. That means I may get some things wrong. That means I may get some things out of order. But this is basically where I remember it going. And it was really kind of the source of a couple of other stories that I've already told, but particular takes on those stories that one of which is a recurring issue, a particular dungeon I've designed that I've used in several games, and one of them I've actually told pretty much verbatim. I don't know if I've told it on this particular series, but I've told it in the past to people. So if you recognize it, this just kind of puts them all into context. Now, when last we left, the group had basically just witnessed the completion of an evil ritual. This Baron had basically sacrificed this woman that they were trying to protect in order to bring back this entity called the Bloodlord, who was an evil vampire lord that had been locked away centuries earlier. During this same fight, the paladin had discovered that his powers were gone, simply because he'd been acting kind of like an asshole this entire time, and not even just an asshole, but an evil asshole. And he discovered that he had no powers. So during this whole transition, I was asked, not only by the paladin but by others in the group, whether it was possible to get the paladin his powers back. Now, normally when a paladin willfully commits an evil act, that's a no-go. It's just flat out no, you don't get your powers back. At least that's how it used to go back in the day when paladins were lawful good. Now they can be like any sort of alignment whatsoever, so you have evil paladins. Who knows? Anyway, back then they were still supposed to be lawful good, and usually when you committed an evil act, it was like no-go. You can't get your powers back. That's one reason why I don't really ride the whole everything must be a lawful good act from a paladin, because it makes it so they're more likely to actually jump off of the deep end in a manner that's believable, rather than trying to micromanage and nitpick every legalistic thing that they may do. So this is a paladin. This paladin basically on this gradually worsening step, down and down, committing more and more acts that were completely not good and verging into definitely evil territory, simply because he was getting away with some of the borderline stuff. So yeah, he jumped off that deep end. And normally I would say, hey, too bad. But I did get asked by several people in the group, and really, the group had not accumulated enough experience points and other gear in order to really face the Bloodlord. At least they didn't think so. So they were kind of actually looking for filler just so they could take on this evil vampire that I'd hyped up. If the paladin was still a paladin and they were still at full strength, they would probably have been able to take on the Bloodlord, because they didn't know how I was designing that last major adventure area. But I can understand their hesitation. So I went ahead and I told them that they could have one of two options to go on in order for this paladin to recover his abilities. The first would be to undergo a pilgrimage to a holy shrine, and that holy shrine was a fairly distant ways away in a direction that nobody had been to, so they couldn't even arrange teleports or anything. So it was going to have to be as fast as they could to go way out of their way to go ahead and undertake this pilgrimage. And then if they could convince the saint who supposedly still dwelled there, even though he was supposed to be dead for hundreds of years, if they could convince somehow the spirit of this saint to go ahead and absolve him, then he might get his powers back. Might. So there was like they weren't entirely convinced they could do it simply because their past acts had showed that they were less than convincing sometimes. But he thought he could do it. The other one was to go to a much closer area where a fallen star had been seen to fall in, recover said star from wherever it landed, and basically make a holy avenger. Work with some local priests and make a holy avenger. And by creating this holy avenger, he would redeem himself. And they thought, well, wait a minute, that sounds like a bit of a dungeon crawl, and it's much closer. Let's go to that one. So they investigated into it, only to discover that this fallen star had crashed into this swamp. And so that all of a sudden their enthusiasm for this thing died down a little bit. But they were still active. So they started going towards this swamp, and they started getting reports of how this star had basically crashed into the swamp with such force that it actually punched a hole into basically a sinkhole underneath the swamp. So it was at the bottom of this limestone cavern under a swamp. And at this point, one or two of the players and some of my viewers may be recognizing the setup of this particular dungeon. Because I've run versions of this dungeon, not all the time, but some versions of this dungeon in multiple editions in the past. It's usually I put in an optional dungeon, and I usually put in some manner of major weapon. And I change the maps around sometimes, but they usually follow a similar floor plan. But it's the theme of the dungeon that matters. And it's a dungeon called The Hole. And I've talked about this in videos past. And I put The Hole in this particular campaign. I basically said, okay, so you've got this... For those who don't know, The Hole is basically a hole. It's a dungeon that's either a crater or usually some sort of sinkhole under a crater. So you've got this big cavern. It's usually wet. It's usually damp. It's usually got treacherous, treacherous walls and such. It's not so much a dungeon crawl where you go through tunnels and such. It's like you go into the inside of a bottle or a vase where the walls curve outward like this and then come down, and then your goal is at the bottom, and you can just jump down the middle if you've got the skills for it. There's usually some sort of magical radiation that starts interfering with fly spells, but more importantly, it's usually full of vermin, of insects, full of slimes, oozes, all these things that just completely wear on a party and degrade them and take their material down. It gives them status effects. It poisons them. They've usually got disease issues by the time they hit the bottom. It's basically an unpleasant dungeon to play in. And so they got to this place, and they started going after it because they thought it was much closer. They may as well try it. And they got about 4 days into the swamp surrounding the hole, and they were only just now seeing it in the distance. They still had about a day and a half left of travel. And already they were just debilitated by disease because of a series of bad rolls. They had 3 people diseased. The paladin hadn't regained his immunity to disease yet because he was still not a paladin. And he was suffering from disease. And they got there and they decided, wait a minute, how are we going to get down there? Because at this point we can barely hold a sword up. So they retreated before they actually went to the hole. And I think some of that was on the people that had played that dungeon or heard of it in the past and decided no, they didn't want to take it on. But they got all the way there, got to within eyesight of this place. They were basically seeing this glow on the horizon where the hole was. And they gave up. No, we're not going to make it, man. And even if we do get down to the bottom, we got to march out of this swamp. So they turned around and they left. They decided to go on the pilgrimage. So they basically killed, I think it ended up being 2 weeks of game time for nothing. And all the time in the background, the Bloodlord's gathering up his abilities, and he's beginning to pick out old allies and either bring them back if they're still alive or go rob their graves and take them all to his castle, which has reappeared from the ether. And I was saying you get reports of this castle just having appeared. So they know that times are passing, but they still don't feel comfortable going after them. So they go after the pilgrimage, and they travel, and the dice are kind to them this time. They actually hook up with another caravan, and they end up getting to this place, and it kills another 3 weeks just getting to the place. So by now the Bloodlord's been active for a month. But due to their traveling so far, they're getting out of the range where they're hearing constant news updates. So that kind of starts taking a background. It's like the end of the world's happening, but it's happening a ways away. So they feel like they're pretty safe at this point. So they manage to get to the Shrine of Arcadius, which is the Saint Arcadius. And it's this little quiet shrine up in the mountains. And so they go in there, and nobody in the party knows about this saint. They know that it's guarded by a number of people who claim to be his descendants. And they go in there, and yeah, they find this little tiny temple that's all filled with low-level priests, low-level clerics. And they ask to see Arcadius, and the clerics are like, well, you have to go back to the shrine and pray. And so at this point they start asking, well, how long do we have to pray? And like it's something that just could, like it's some sort of, some sort of right for them to just be there and get their paladin restored and then go. And I'm sitting there shaking my head because they're approaching it all wrong. They're acting entitled at this point. So, oh, we got here. The paladin needs to be restored so we can be on our way. And there were ways to approach it. There were some things like you could have told them, like you could have told the priest, hey, the Bloodlord's active. We need to, this is kind of important. But they didn't even bring that up. They were just, hey, where's the saint? So after adamantly being told to go back there and meditate for a while, the paladin finally gives in and he goes to the back of the shrine and he meditates. And the rest of the group kind of wanders off to hang out outside. So, a day passes, the paladin's in meditation. And finally I have Saint Arcadius show up. And the thing about this particular saint is that he was once a powerful cleric. So he's become kind of a good clerical lich. A good clerical lich. I'm going to pronounce it that way. A good clerical lich. So he comes out there, he starts shuffling out there. And, Saint Arcadius comes from the back, and he's like, greetings, my child. And the paladin looks up, and he sees it, and he grabs his sword. And he's like, I detect evil. And I'm like, you're not a paladin, dude. So he jumps to his feet, and he swings at the saint. Saint is just this unarmed. I mean, it's a lich, yeah. It's clearly a skeleton that walked in from the back, but it's the skeleton's in holy raiments. He's got a freaking halo over his head, and he's moving like a monk in prayer. He's got no weapons, made no sense of attacks. He doesn't even have a fear aura. I say I've given him some sort of healing aura. And in later 3.5, that would be called a better thing to do would have been to call out of the book of Exalted Deeds. If I'd had that at the time, I did not have that at the time I ran this. If I had that at the time, I would have actually used the Saint template, and I would have used. They've got this thing called the Deathless, which is basically an undead but a good undead. I would have used one of those. I didn't have it at the time. But even though I didn't have it, this lich had similar characteristics to what they eventually gave the Saints and the Deathless in the Book of Exalted Deeds. But he goes ahead and attacks the Saint, and I'm like, oh my god! And the people in the group that are reading this, reading his attacks, just kind of facepalm. They're like, "What did you do?" So the Saint just shrugs off his attacks and asks him, "Please, don't attack. I would hear what you have to say." And at this point, the rest of the group rolls in because they hear that they hear the commotion, they hear the paladin screaming about evil, and the rest of the priests walk in, and they see him attacking the saint, and the priests are horrified. They're like, Why are you doing that? He's not even fighting back. And the paladin is unable. He's unable to do much damage, but he just physically overbears this skeleton to the ground and starts smashing him with the pommel of his sword. And the saint's like, "I forgive you, ow! I forgive you, ow!" And he's just getting smacked around. And finally, the group comes in and they pull the paladin aside, and the priest pull the saint aside, and the saint stands up. And he's like, "Why did you attack me?" And the paladin's like, "Well, because you're evil." And the saint looks at him and he says, "So do you assault all people that you believe are evil, regardless of proof?" And the paladin stumped on that one because he's like, "Well, yeah, I do," and he can't deny it. So the rest of the party steps in at this point, and they tell the Saint Arcadius that, the paladin's kind of an idiot, and they make a better case for the paladin being redeemed than the paladin does. And the saint keeps on telling them, "No, I want to hear from him," and they're just like, "No, this is what's going on. The Bloodlord's been released. Our friend here is a little bit misguided, but he means well." And the saints just keeps trying to get the answers from the paladin, and the rest of the group keeps typing over him. I mean, everybody's typing on IRC, but so they're not interrupting him, but they're just flooding the chat with what their characters would say, regardless of the saint telling them not to. And the paladin is just kind of basically stating what they say. He's waiting until they post it, and then he posts it. And it's kind of bullshit, but I just shrug my shoulder and say, and tell him, "Okay, well, Saint Arcadius has heard your pleas, and he decides that, yes, he will absolve the paladin. He will absolve the paladin, provided that you defeat the Bloodlord. On the understanding that if he slips up or comes close to slipping up just once, that he will lose all of his powers again irrevocably." And so the rest of the party is grateful that they've got the paladin back to where he was. And they have the temerity to ask if the saint has anything to help them on their way, like item-wise, as they leave. And Saint Arcadius just shakes his head and just heads to the back, because at this point, I'm not sure what to do with him. Rightly, I should have just left the paladin sit there as kind of a crap fighter for the rest of his days, but you do what you can. So the saint wanders back, and they start making their way back to town, and they're still talking back and forth about what to do to get experience and to get gear in order to face the Bloodlord. And I'm hearing them. I want them to have a good time. They're basically actually starting to talk about just not finishing the campaign at this point if they don't get more if they don't have a better plan to take on the Bloodlord. So I'm like, well, I don't want to wrap up the campaign right now on that. They're like in the middle of travel. I'll throw them a bone. So I have a character that I play in a lot of places. It's actually based on an old Advanced Dungeons & Dragons character of mine called Ravenetti Tavard. And right now, people who watch this who have encountered that character in the past are probably, oh, that's how you pronounce it. No, it's Ravenetti. It's Ravenetti. That's the pronunciation. And then it's Tavard. Actually, here's the issue. It is technically Ravenetti, like with a Vin, not a Ven. But when you pronounce just the shortened form, which is Raven, it's just like the bird Raven. And so the pronunciation shifts. That's why you sometimes you'll hear me called Rav in some videos, because I play that character a lot. I played it in several channels that had dice. I played it in several channels that did not have dice. I played it in several games over the years. I started him back in the day as a first level character in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. And I could make an entire series of videos just on that character. He's well known amongst the people that I play with. I don't know that he's kind of a Mary Sue type character, but at the same time, I don't want to say that he's not a powerful character. But on the other hand, I did play him from first level magic user back in the day. or actually he started as a first level thief back in the day. So yeah, I played him until he got into the epic level there. So there is a lot of development behind that character. But that aside, he's well known to the group. He's basically this necromancer. He's got a couple class levels because in AD&D Second Edition you could dual class. Humans could dual class, and he had like a 15 dexterity, 18 intelligence, 17 wisdom, or something that I rolled. And so he started as a thief. Didn't stay as a thief very long. Got just a couple levels as thief, then dual classed over into wizard. Got way high in levels, then dual classed over to cleric, and then spent a lot of his career just basically absorbing domain style experience because we were running a prolonged campaign at the time, and just adding it to his cleric ability. So eventually became he's mostly a wizard cleric with just a dash of rogue, just a dash of thief. Because let's face it, in AD&D Second Edition, thieves advance like crazy. So I was able to get I think he has like 5 levels of thief. Just a dash. That's basically 2 levels of another class. So he's a well-experienced character. So I have him show up on the road looking for something, and he's looking for basically lost items. He was passing through the area, and he basically lost his luggage. That was the whole purpose of this. And the idea was that he would give the group a quest to go pick up his luggage, and when they came back, he would grant them some items that he thought would help them. So they encountered him. But here's the problem. They know this character and his likes and his dislikes from another place. So when they encountered him, they know, number one, he's evil. But number two, he's also very extremely rigidly lawful and can be made deals with. And number three, they also know he has a penchant for basically enjoying his privileges. He's like the ultimate in corrupt politicians, or he'll sit there and surround himself with riches and attractive women, and just lays about all day, and do the occasional thing for the people or people who petition him. But there's always a quid pro quo. There's always something in exchange for something. If you want a favor from him, he'll do in exchange for a favor. So they listen to him talking about getting his luggage, and they are not pleased, and they try to make a deal directly with him. And even the paladin starts going in, and then somebody has to remind the paladin that, wait a minute, you need to remember Ravenetti is a cleric of an archdevil. You might want to back off on this one. And reluctantly, the paladin agreed. But they did not want to do this luggage quest, and I was like, and I had the character there, and he was basically saying, look, go get my luggage, I'll get you stuff. And they were like, no, you know what? If you give us stuff now, we'll give you this. And they started drawing up deals and such, and I'm just rubbing my head because they were basically trying to get something for nothing, because they knew that if these deals if they took these deals, they could actually finish the campaign and then just say, okay, now my character goes off to work for Rav for the rest of their life, and we can just call this campaign and start a new one. And so they battered him about it. And eventually I'm like, look, okay, at some point Raven is like, you know what? You guys clearly don't want my help. And lo, I think I see my luggage in the distance. I'm going to go get it myself. Fuck you guys. And I had him walk off. And they were shocked that they were not able to just be given magic items. And at this point, even I'm becoming a little bit irritated with the campaign, because it's been going downhill in terms of player attitude for a little while now. So I'm like, look, if you guys want to continue to play, if you guys want to wrap this campaign up right now, let's do it. Just tell me right now, and I'll just go play something else. They're like, well, you're going to make another campaign? I'm like, not with you guys, not with you. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to DM another campaign where you act like that. And so there was like this brief pause, and we took like a week or two off to think about things. And sometimes that's the best thing you can do for a gaming group, is just to take a little time off and think about where things are going. And eventually they decided that none of them really wanted to run a campaign with the others involved, and yet they all wanted to play in a campaign. And so they said, yeah, well, let's go ahead and finish this one off. And I said, look, if you wipe, that's one thing. But if you just call it, I've had that happen a number of times, and I get tired of it. And in fact, that's another thing I could make a video on. I've had a lot of campaigns get to like the mid-teens levels and then just peter off due to lack of player interest. This is why I always like to play low-level campaigns, is because those are the campaigns I get to play more often. I very rarely get to play high-level campaigns unless I'm an actual player. If I'm running something, a lot of things happen, and on the one hand, I kind of take the blame, because sometimes, due to the fact that I have a limited amount of experience running higher-end campaigns, I think sometimes that my storylines get a little old at that point, and my storytelling falls apart. But if I look back at it, a lot of the campaigns that have fallen through before the mid-teens have either happened through total party wipe, or through players just kind of not having the schedule match up. Because usually by the time you reach the mid-teens, the campaign's been going on for a long time. Usually about, the way I run things, depending on the system, you get almost a year worth of play before they start getting above level 10 or so. And so that's one of the things that on the one hand, I do take some blame for it, because I don't have a lot of experience running things from the mid-teens up. But on the other hand, that's about the time when people's schedules start changing. If you've got a long time thing going, some people may have work or life changes, and things start falling apart for other reasons. I think I've only had one campaign where people just said that they weren't enjoying it at that point anymore. And that was a 4th edition campaign. And that was, I don't take my blame for that one, because I was simply running the 4th edition modules in a row. And they got through the Troll Hunt Warrens. They got to the first Drow one, the Drow Queen's Enclave or whatever, and they started that one, and then all of a sudden none of them could make it. They were like, I'm sorry, my schedule changed. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have time for this anymore. And I said, well, okay, if nobody has time, I'm going to start a new campaign. I'm going to start a new Pathfinder campaign. And as soon as I said that, all of a sudden everybody had time again. And I asked them later, and they were basically, no, it's not you. It's just the 4th edition material. Anyway, I've gone off track here. I want to go back to the Bloodlord thing. At this point, people were getting tired of it, not necessarily because of the campaign, but because their characters had really taken a hard blow from the paladin losing his powers, and from the Bloodlord sacrifice going through, because only one of them was expecting it, and he didn't say anything, and so there was some inter-party tension at this point. So they start going, they drive my token, here's a powerful character that can give you stuff. They drive him away through their pestering, and they're left on the road. They decide to pick it up, and so they head towards the Bloodlord's castle. They decide, you know what, we'll do it for the final thing. One way or another, this campaign's going to end, even if it ends in everybody dying. So they get to the Bloodlord's castle, and it's like in a really obvious place. And it's not like this castle was a place on the map that they just hadn't been. It's the way I designed the Bloodlord and the Bloodlord's castle was basically ripped off heavily from Castlevania. Not completely, but I wanted to run something that was reliably and recognizably Castlevania inspired. So you've got this big castle. It's not even a sprawling castle. It's just like tall and compact, and it was in an area that already existed but had been locked away in the ethereal plane, and now that seal had been broken, now it's there again. So you've got this castle just appear out of nowhere. And they get towards the castle, and they run across these villages that had been completely wiped out, and they start getting this sense of foreboding, like, oh no, maybe we Maybe we wasted too much time, but regardless, they keep going and they keep going. So when they get really close, they start encountering these groups of low-end undead. And nothing's really, really challenging. Like a half dozen zombies here, a couple ghouls there. Basically something that they can kill and then just keep going. And they're slowly getting a little bit of experience. Not a lot, but a little bit, because some of this stuff is too low level to even give them experience at this point. Thank you, 3rd edition challenge ratings. So they eventually get to make camp outside of this castle, and they see that the main gates, the big tall gates, they're open. No one makes any effort to close them. They see skeletons along the top of the towers. They see zombies crossing back and forth past the gates, but nobody comes out to challenge them. And they're like, well, we could just walk in, but that looks kind of scary. So they spend like 2 days camped outside these gates, fighting the occasional zombie patrol or whatever. And then they just search this area looking for some way into the castle besides the obvious open gates. And I'm like, okay, well, they do find the sally port, but it's surrounded with brambles, and I made that look, you can't, in terms of verbally, or in terms of the verbal description, or in this case, the typed description, I tried to make it sound as ominous as the main gates, if not more so. So they were looking at this darkened this darkened niche surrounded by thorns, surrounded by twisted vines with knife-like thorns 6 inches long, lies sunk into the base of the hill upon which the Bloodlord's castle rises. Through the shadows, you see behind a screen of cobwebs a lone door sunk in and with a skull for a door handle. And they looked at that and they said, you know what, let's try the main gate. Okay. So they circle around to the main gates, and then they gear up. They get interrupted overnight by a couple more zombie patrols. So the next dawn, they start walking in. They're like, let's do it by daytime. And I'm like, okay. And as soon as they step through the gates, I'm like, as soon as you step through the gates, the sky becomes dark as night. And they're like, God damn it. So they get in there and they start fighting a few more encounters. There's more zombies in there. There's more ghouls. There's still low-end undead, but at this point it's enough to start giving them experience again, start giving them a real challenge again. And there's a lot of them. They're not flocking in, but there's like obvious patrols wandering around. And the entire courtyard itself is not that big. It's like maybe 100 feet across. And then you've got this main castle up above, and then you've got this area with like barracks and stables over to your right, and then you've got this chapel over to the left. And then you've got these walls that go around, and they've got towers in them. And I'm like, well, you can go anywhere you want. You're on the inside of the wall, so you can actually go to one of these towers, fight your way up, and then do the walls. You can go over to the barracks and the stable and the armory. You can go to the main castle itself. You can go over to the chapel. I'm giving them all kinds of options, and they're seeing various undead. But even though they're engaging little groups, most of the undead aren't joining in because it looks like they've basically set siege to this chapel and they can't approach it. I'm like, the chapel still looks like it did the day it was built. It's got kind of like this radiant aura on it. So the chapel, I tried to make it so that the chapel sounded like a good place to rest up, because I made it the place to rest up. So eventually, after fighting a couple wanderers, they finally clue in on that, and they're like, let's go into the chapel to see what's going on. So they go into the chapel, and inside the chapel, I've got this angel, and the angel's bound, but he's bound by his own will. This is just this large, I think it was a solar, because like CR19 or whatever. And he's sitting there at the far end, and he's basically sustaining this shield. And they go in there, and they rest, and they find out, hey, you can rest here. You not only are safe, but you get additional bonuses to healing. And then they talk to the Solar, and he's basically like, I've been here for centuries to keep an eye on the Bloodlord. I've kept this through my actions. I have set up a shield in this chapel. My presence here is the only reason this chapel is safe. I will continue to keep it safe so you can rest here between excursions against the Bloodlord. And at this point, the paladin says, "Well, you know what? They're still going outside from time to time because this is all just one rest." And the paladin's like, "You know what? There's a lot of enemies out there." And he goes out there, and he counts like maybe 30 more undead in the courtyard along the walls, and behind him the rest of the group is setting camp in this chapel. So before I continue, it's important to note another aspect of the whole Bloodlord's castle thing. I designed it like this castle that had come out of the ethereal plane. So, there were multiple areas they could go to. I've already explained that part. But, that's really not enough to... Even on a best case scenario, that's really not enough to build the characters up to the point where they could take on the Bloodlord. That'd be like dropping the characters right outside of Castle Ravenloft, expecting them to be high enough level to hit Count Strahd von Zarovich toward the end, So I went ahead and made it so the castle, I took some inspiration from another Castlevania, made it so that the castle had actually been in the ethereal plane long enough that there was a version of it there, like a nightmare twisted version, kind of like the Upside Down castle almost, except not upside down. So the whole point was to get them to go in, fight their way up towards some place high in the castle, discover a outlet to the ethereal plane, go to the ethereal plane, fight all the way through, this time fighting, ethereal enemies, most of which were ghosts, wraiths, that sort of bodiless undead, and then eventually get back to the original castle and face the Bloodlord one-on-one. Or, at this point, 6-on-1, I think it was. And the thing about that is this. A lot of creatures that are ethereal in 3rd edition can also affect the prime plane. So the whole idea was that they weren't going to, but the only reason they weren't going to was because the Bloodlord had them directed to look at this chapel, watching for any sort of wavering in the shield. The problem is the party didn't know all these things were there on the other side until the paladin walks out and he's like, well, I see like 40 people. Or I see like 40 undead scattered about the place, in little groups. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk into the middle of the courtyard and I'm going to hit, detect evil, and I'm just going to turn around and find out how many sources of evil that I can discover. And the rest of by this time they've killed a lot of the patrols that went through the main courtyard, so he was pretty confident in this. And the rest of the group just kind of sat back at the entrance to this chapel to watch him, and he goes over and does that. So a curious thing happens when you start looking at scale. Most castles, even pretty big ones, as long as they're not sprawling, but most castles that are built in a compact format, they're not that big. Even the larger castles, even the large sprawling ones, are just not that big compared to what you'd think on some of the modern scales, at least not European-inspired castles. So he goes out there, and he can't cover the whole castle, but he can cover quite a bit of the ground. And not a lot, only a few of the castle walls are actually thick enough to block the detect undead. There's still windows and such in the castle proper, and then there's the issue with the ethereal versions of everything, which he cannot see, but he could possibly detect. So he does this, and how many sources of evil do I detect? And I do some quick math, and I'm like, holy crap! So I quickly add it up, and the players are getting more and more nervous the longer it takes me to add up this thing. I'm like, man, there's like 140 sources of evil that you can detect. And you can't detect inside the castle, and he's just they were just shocked. I don't know what expression they had because it's all through text, but they were like, they started typing, what, 140 plus, and I'm like, yeah. So they go in and they start talking, and they aren't aware that half the castle is in the ethereal plane. Thus, it's really more like a 40 that he could determine than 100 on the ethereal plane. Which is actually kind of in line with what they'd already killed, because they'd already killed a large number of random little undead. But they didn't know they were in the ethereal plane, so they start talking back and forth. What, are they invisible? Or maybe they're behind wood, and I can detect through the wood, but I can't detect, I can't detect through the stone. And there's back and forth and back and forth. So finally the paladin starts going, what we're going to need? And he looks over to the Solar and he says, "We're going to need some help." And in one of the party, forget who, but one of them, I think it might have been Magnus, was started up with, "That's not a good idea." And the Paladin Valdemar was like, "Yeah, it's a good idea." And he walks over to the Solar. And I'm beginning to get an inkling of what he's going to try to do. And the Solar's like, "I'm using all my strength to keep the shield up so you have a place to rest." And the Paladin shakes his head and says, "We need you to help us." And so he starts just haranguing this angel, like over and over and over again, just saying, "What are you, a coward? Join us. We have to smite evil." And the rest of the party's, typing in, "Oh, I start walking away from the Paladin." And they're backing off from the Paladin. And the angel flat out says, "If I drop this shield," I'm kind of stunned at this guy. I'm sitting there going, out of character. I note, that just because he's CR19 doesn't mean that he's invincible. And the Paladin is, he just blows it off out of character. "I know, let me do what I'm doing in character." And I'm like, okay. So he starts rolling. He does intimidate. He does diplomacy. He does everything except bluff. I don't think he does bluff because he realized his mistakes before, but he just does not give this angel any rest. And we spend like 30 minutes just with him just throwing out different reasons for this Solar, this Celestial, to drop the shield and fight with him. And the Solar tells him, "If I drop this shield, everything is going to come to us at once." And the Paladin is like, "I don't care." And he starts rolling, and he's like, look, I'm rolling like 23, 25. The Solar has to do what I say. I'm rolling like natural 20s on these persuasion rolls." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you're asking him to do something that's literally suicide, basically." But he keeps going at it and pushing the issue. And sometimes I'll take a break to make other plans, and then he just goes right back to pushing the issue. And we spend seriously a full session with this guy just trying to convince this angel to drop the shield. And at the end of the session, I'm like, you know what? The angel literally just says, "Fine, I'll join your crusade." The shield drops. Roll initiative. And they're like, "Roll initiative? We only have like about 10 minutes left for this session." I said, "Just roll initiative. It's going to take me that long to roll initiative for the next time." And there's, everybody gets quiet. But they roll initiative, and I put it in the encounter. And we're using, at this point, most of it's done over IRC, but we are using the occasional map tools, I think it was, to go ahead and do maps. I start rolling initiative, and they start counting the number of initiative rolls I'm doing. Because when that shield drops, the Bloodlord detects it because he's got half his troops out there looking at this thing. And so he basically says, "Okay, storm it. The shield's down, storm it. The protections are gone. Just go in there and kill that angel." He doesn't even know he might know the party's there, but he doesn't even care if the party's there. He's like, "Do it. That Solar has been a thorn in my side for centuries." The party's unaware of this, but they're seeing me roll dice and roll dice and roll dice. And they the session wraps up, and I'm still rolling dice on the dice bot, and they're like, "Oh shit." So there's like some talk about it. And then the next time, the next session starts up with, "Can I take that back?" And I'm like, "Nah, man, you spent a full session demanding this angel drop this shield. You said that you could take it. We're doing this. We're doing this right now. You guys wanted to end this campaign? Fine. We're doing this fight right now." I was a little bit vindictive because I did not appreciate being basically browbeat by this Paladin that was absolutely insistent on this course of action, only to let him just go off, just to reverse it that quickly, especially after I'd given him that second chance. I'd given him more chances than I really rightly should have. So, they start the next session. The very last, it was not the last session of the game. This fight actually took 2 sessions and the game dropped off. But, they start up. Angel drops the shield, stands up, draws his sword, and immediately ghosts start swarming in from the top. Wraiths start swarming in from the top and appearing. From the windows, ghouls and skeletons start smashing through the windows and coming in. And I'm just placing more and more and more tokens on the map tools board, because we were using map tools. And the party was like, holy crap. And so this fight just starts immediately. And I've extended the map to the courtyard, and they see like all kinds of undead, everything from skeletons all the way up to, high-end wraiths. I think they had a couple specters in there. They didn't have anything like vampire or above, so it was mostly mid-range to low-range undead. But there was a lot of them. And so, like the first session, I allocated 2 hours. I allocated 3 hours for that first session, and we got 2 rounds of combat done. And the undead were just swarming people left and right. People were busting out the area of effect spells. Magnus was throwing these acid balls around. The paladin was busting out his turn undead, only to find out it affected a very, very small percentage of the things just because there were so many of them. And they are on for the fight for their lives. And 2 rounds, it takes them 2 rounds to kill the undead, to kill the Solar. 2 rounds, just 2 rounds. And when that Solar goes down, I'm like, okay. There's swarms. The party's been separated. They got the rogue. The rogue saw this shit going on, and he left. He goes, okay, I hide, and I'm out. I leave. So the party, like halfway through the first round, they realize, wait, where's the rogue going? And Arliss is like, out the door. He's gone, man. He's in the courtyard. He's stealthing away from all these things. He's noticing that he can do it. He's gone, man. He's just gone. And Magnus is like, oh man, we may not make this. And the paladin is like, coward, I will kill them all. And he's getting negative levels thrown on him left and right. And at the end of the session, I'm like, and finally one of the wraiths, they've been some of the enemies are spellcasters. Some of the enemies are spellcasters. They've been throwing spells at this angel. Most of it's bouncing off, and he's got protection from evil, so some of that's bouncing off. So he's really barely taking anything. But if you have that many rolls, eventually some damage is going to get through. And so by the first round, the angel, at the end of the first round, the angel's still doing pretty good. The Solar's still doing pretty good. The end of the second round, he goes down because of a very, very serious number of attacks at that point. And at this point, they've eliminated a large number of undead. They've killed dozens of these undead. They have like piles of bones laying around. They got dead zombies up to their waist. They got dead wights. They've got ghosts just poofing into dust left and right. But the onslaught is just incredible. And when that angel goes down, they realize that they may have fucked up. So at this point, the campaign goes into. It's clear that it's probably going to be a total party wipe. And between sessions, apparently some of the group had got on the rogue for running away, and he decided to try and come back in the next session. But they were already wounded; they were falling apart. So the next session was relatively short because about an hour and a half in, we got another round worth of combat in, and at this point, the party there was only like the paladin went down first out of all, and then. At the end of that first round, there was only the rogue and I think Magnus again, and the additional they had the additional fighter, the turret guy, and he went down, and they did not have the spare rogue, but the NPC cleric was down, the paladin was down, as I said, he was the first to go, so they were left with the rogue and the wizard, and at that point, when they were wrapping up, and the rogue said, "Look, I'm going to run again." And Magnus, the wizard, was like, don't run. What I'm going to do is I'm going to teleport us out. And he teleported himself and the rogue out. And I count that, it ended up pretty much being a total party wipe because they just abandoned it. And they were like, we can't do this. There were issues. And the sad part about that campaign is that they rested the paladin's actions firmly on the paladin's player. And admittedly, it was probably mostly the player. You can say, "Oh, I'm just role playing my character" as much as you want, but eventually you got to take some flack for your character's actions. And at this point, there was some, shall we say, spirited disagreements for the rest of that session. As a DM, I probably should have stepped in and settled things, but there was only so much I could do because it was very clear. There were some people that weren't team players. The rogue was getting irritated at everybody, and it just was clear that this group was not going to stick together. So we wrapped up. It's a sad end to that particular campaign. Evil won the day, and the group decided to break up after that. They were like, "Yeah, we're not." I mean, I had those same players. Most of them, I think two of them left, but most of the same players came back to play in later campaigns of mine. They were like, "No, it's not on you. It's just that particular group." Sometimes you get a group of personalities that seem like they're going to click, and then it just becomes increasingly apparent over time that they are not going to do it. And they don't go out of their way to grief, but it becomes very clear that they have very different ways of doing things. So and sometimes, conflicts in game, they really shouldn't spill over to the real world, but if one player is like obviously just wrecking things, just derailing things, there's sometimes you got to take them on their side to talk to them. And I hate to admit it, there's always this, you should always try to save the game, but some groups aren't worth saving. Some groups, if you don't want to step in and say who's right and who's wrong, you should never really have to do that. But some groups they're just incompatible. They may not be griefers. They may just like completely different styles of game, and it's very clear sometimes that it's better for everybody involved to just let that go, because that way those players who disagree can find games that are more suited to them. And that's what happened here. Was that after that particular clusterfuck at the end, it was clear that they were not going to get along with some of these people. So, I never did get another group to tackle that campaign world again, but it did give me some good stories. It gave me the reminiscent of the angel that got browbeaten to dropping his duty. It gave me another incident of me putting the hole in a campaign and not getting to use it. I need to put that together for like a 5th edition release. I don't know how I'd do that. I have not released anything for public, for public consumption. Just a dungeon that's just nothing but misery. Just slimes and bugs and disease. I don't know, I may have to do that someday. Anyway, that has been the saga of the Return of the Bloodlord. And if I ever do that campaign again, I could probably find my notes and drag it out. I could either do it from the beginning, or I could do it like a sequel, like where the Bloodlord's been around for a while or something. But, I might have to take a look at it. Anyway, this has been the RPG Crawler with my RPG Storytime, Rise of the Bloodlord. I hope you've enjoyed it. Not all of my story times are going to be this long and involved. Some of them are going to be shorter. A lot of them are going to be shorter. Some of them are going to involve just like looking at books. Those of you who have been watching the series know. And not all of them are from logs. Unfortunately, I only have notes and logs for only a couple of my campaigns through the years. I have scraps here and there, but nothing as complete as for this one. I think I've got this one, and then the Japanese-inspired Pathfinder game where the Naga and the Oni fight came from. So I've got that one logged as well. But most of them I pull from memory. This one, I'm glad I had the logs because a lot of stuff happened that I would have forgotten. And I'm going to wrap it up here. As I said, this has been the RPG Crawler. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like. Comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. Until next time, take care and goodbye.